Imagine you have spent your entire life watching people from the other side of a pane of glass. Not because you chose distance, not because you were broken or cold. Something essential kept failing to connect, no matter what. You were there, they were there, and still, somehow, you were completely alone in the most crowded sense of the word. Now imagine discovering a philosopher who died 150 years ago had already mapped the exact territory of your interior life. He named the mechanism of your isolation and offered not comfort, but truth. What follows is that discovery will unsettle you before it frees you. There is a feeling that almost nobody talks about openly. It is not sadness exactly. It is not loneliness in the way most people mean it. It is something quieter, more specific. It is sitting in a crowded room surrounded by laughter, and still feeling completely, utterly invisible. Not because people ignored you, not because you did something wrong, but because no one in that room was thinking what you were thinking. After a while, you stop trying. If you have ever felt that way, even once, what follows is for you. What you felt was not a flaw. It was not a disorder. It was not evidence that something is broken inside you. According to one of history's most honest philosophers, what you felt might actually be evidence of something rare, something real, something most people spend their entire lives running from. His name was Arthur Schopenhauer. He was a German philosopher who lived in the 1800s. He was difficult, stubborn, deeply unpopular, almost completely ignored by academia for most of his career. And yet he told the absolute truth about the cost of thinking. We are going to examine that cost, not the intelligence that gets good grades, but the deeper kind. The kind that makes you question. The kind that makes silence feel more honest than conversation. The kind that isolates you, paradoxically, and might set you free. Most people who resonate with these ideas can trace the feeling back to childhood, not to a specific moment, more like a slow accumulation. A growing awareness that something was different, not wrong, but different. Maybe you were the kid who kept asking why. Not to be difficult, just because the answer given did not satisfy you. You wanted to understand the thing underneath the thing. Eventually you learned to stop asking, because asking too many questions made others stare and slowed everything down for everyone else. Or maybe you were the kid who found it hard to get excited about what everyone else was excited about. Not depression, just honesty. You could not fake enthusiasm. If something felt hollow, you felt it as hollow. No social pressure could make you pretend otherwise. Or maybe you were simply quiet, not shy. Quiet, there is a difference. Shy people want to talk but are afraid to. Quiet people are listening, they are processing, they are watching. And often, they are watching something nobody else in the room notices. In any of these cases, the experience is the same. A subtle sense of not quite fitting, watching life through glass. And the question that follows you around, usually unspoken, sometimes not even conscious, what is wrong with me? Here is what Schopenhauer would say to that question. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. But he would also say something more unsettling. He would say the world you live in was not built for people like you. Learning to live inside it, honestly, is the hardest thing. To understand Schopenhauer's real argument, you need to understand how he saw human society. And he saw it clearly. Perhaps too clearly for his own social comfort. He believed that most humans live their lives in a kind of automatic state. Not consciously, not deliberately, they adopt the opinions of their community. They repeat the values they were raised with. They laugh at what they are supposed to laugh at. They fear what they are supposed to fear. They want what they are told to want. They move through life like a school of fish, each one following the one in front, never asking where they are all swimming. Schopenhauer called this the herd mentality, and he was not being cruel when he said it. He was being descriptive. Being part of the herd is not stupidity, it is a survival strategy. It has always been. Fitting in was once life or death. If you were cast out of the tribe, you died. Your brain knows this. Your nervous system knows this. You are wired to seek acceptance. Problem is that some people cannot do it. Not because they refuse necessarily, but because their minds will not let them rest at the surface. They keep going deeper. They keep asking questions the group did not sanction. They keep noticing contradictions nobody else wants to name. And when you cannot stop doing that, the group notices. Not always consciously, but a subtle social radar pings loudly. When someone starts behaving like an outsider, the group responds the way it always has. It pushes back. Let us talk about something uncomfortable. Intelligence, real intelligence. that questions and observes independently, is socially threatening, not theoretically threatening, actually threatening, to actual people in actual rooms. Understanding why is crucial to understanding yourself. When you ask a question nobody thought to ask, you implicitly challenge the competence of everyone who did not see it first. That challenge, even if you never intended it, lands like a small emotional punch to anyone whose identity depends on already being smart enough. Psychologists call this the Dunning-Kruger effect. People with limited knowledge wildly overestimate their own competence. They feel fine. They do not know what they do not know, and because they do not know it, they feel confident. They feel settled. They feel fine. Now put a genuinely perceptive person in that environment. Suddenly, the gap becomes visible. Questions start being asked. That comfortable feeling of already being smart enough evaporates. Human beings respond to that evaporation with defensiveness and dismissal. They respond with the subtle but unmistakable social pressure to shut the disruptive person down. This is not a modern problem. Socrates spent his life in the public squares of Athens, asking people to examine their beliefs. He was curious, not cruel. Athens executed him for it. The official charge was corrupting the youth. The real charge was making powerful people feel exposed. Galileo mapped the movement of the planets and concluded Earth revolves around the sun. He was right, he could prove it. The church placed him under house arrest for the rest of his life. Not because the data was wrong, because the data threatened a story. Nikola Tesla died broke and alone in a New York hotel room. The system did not destroy him out of malice, it destroyed him out of comfort. Comfort is always threatened by people who see what is not yet there. And these are just the names history remembered. For every Galileo, thousands of ordinary people in ordinary classrooms and offices had the same experience on a smaller scale, whose insights were dismissed, whose questions were labeled disruptive, whose depth was quietly persistently punished until they learned to hide it. Maybe you are one of them. Here is where the research converges with philosophy. In 2016, a study changed what we thought we knew. Researchers found something counterintuitive. For the average person, more social interaction means more happiness. Friends equal satisfaction. But for people with significantly higher intelligence, that relationship flips. The more they socialized, the lower their life satisfaction. Not marginally lower, meaningfully lower. Their minds crave something the average social situation cannot provide. That creates what researchers call cognitive loneliness. Different from ordinary loneliness, the absence of minds that match yours is being surrounded by people and starving for the kind of exchange that actually feeds your mind. Like a buffet you cannot eat. Psychologist Kazimierz Dabrowski spent decades studying gifted individuals. He introduced a concept he called overexcitability. He identified 5 forms of overexcitability: intellectual, emotional, imaginative, sensory, and psychomotor. These people feel everything more. These individuals are not broken or disordered. In Dabrowski's framing, they are more alive to experience, more porous, more receptive. That heightened receptivity fuels extraordinary creativity, but makes everything louder. Rejection stings deeper, injustice burns hotter. Shallow conversation feels more exhausting. The disconnect between their inner world and the outer world feels more acute. This is not weakness. It is costly. It often leads to anxiety, burnout, and the quiet despair of feeling fundamentally misunderstood by everyone around you. Evolutionary psychologists note the human brain evolved for small hunter-gatherer bands. Intelligence was social then, cooperative, for belonging. Modern high IQ individuals are running ancient hardware in a world updated far faster than evolution can keep pace with. Their discomfort with groupthink, their tolerance for abstraction, not adaptations for the modern world. Evolutionary misfits. The mismatch creates friction. So what do you do with all of this? Schopenhauer's answer was not cheerful. He was not in the business of cheerful answers. But it was honest. And for people told comforting lies that did not help, honesty, even brutal honesty, can feel like cold water. His answer, stated simply, stop fighting the exile. Embrace the solitude, not as a last resort, as the highest form of freedom. He wrote that a man can be himself only so long as he is alone. That sounds depressing until you really sit with it. The version of yourself you perform in social settings, the edited, simplified, crowd-compatible version, is not actually you. It is a costume. Every hour in that costume is an hour away from your actual self. Solitude is not the absence of connection. It is the presence of yourself. Solitude is the space where you stop performing and start existing. Your thoughts can be as long and strange as they actually are, without you pre-editing them for an audience that would not understand anyway. Schopenhauer made a distinction that gets lost in conversation. Loneliness is the pain of wanting connection and not having it. Solitude is the peace of not needing the crowd's approval to feel whole. It can look identical from the outside. They feel entirely different on the inside. Schopenhauer gets genuinely radical here. The capacity for solitude, the ability to be alone and still feel real, is not social failure. It is a marker of psychological strength. Schopenhauer called it the noble intellect, not arrogance. He meant a rich inner life that makes you less dependent on external approval. People who can sit with silence and find something there are less dependent on external noise to feel okay. That independence is genuinely rare. Here is what happens when you stop needing the approval of the group. The group's rejection loses its power over you. Labels, weird, too intense, difficult, too much. They stop sticking. Not because you stop caring about people, but your sense of self is no longer housed in their opinion. That is a kind of freedom most people never taste, because most people spend their entire lives managing how they are perceived, curating personality, shrinking thoughts, softening observations, performing the version that generates the most acceptance. They are exhausted. Quietly, chronically exhausted in a way they cannot name, because they have been doing it so long they forgot there was another way. Let us be honest about the cost, because Schopenhauer was honest about it. There is a grief that comes with seeing clearly. A grief most people who experience it never find language for, because the people around them cannot validate what they are grieving. See patterns in conversations that nobody else seems to see. You notice when someone is performing, rather than actually being present. You feel when a relationship is hollow before the other person is willing to admit it. You watch logic collapse. Under scrutiny, no one else applies. The hardest part is not the seeing. The hardest part is knowing that if you say what you see, the room will go cold. Not because you are wrong, but because you are inconvenient. Because the truth you hold is one they specifically chose not to look at. Pointing at it does not make them grateful. It makes them defensive. It makes them distance themselves. Sometimes it makes them turn on you. So you learn to be quiet, not because you have nothing to say, but because you have learned the math. You have run the experiment enough times. You speak your observation. The room shifts, the conversation changes. Afterward, you notice the subtle cooling, the slight pulling back, the way things are a little more careful, a little more guarded around you. And eventually, you decide the price is not worth it. It is not cowardice, it is adaptation, but it has a cost, because the observations do not go away just because you stopped voicing them. They accumulate. They pile up in the parts of your mind where things go when they are not allowed to be spoken. The accumulation of thoughts you never shared, questions never asked, things you knew that no one wanted to know. It is its own kind of weight. Schopenhauer did not pretend this weight was light. He believed suffering was built into the structure of conscious life. The more aware you are, the more you feel the gap between how things are and how they could be. The more clearly you see, the harder it is to pretend. That is genuinely painful. It is not a phase. It is not something you grow out of. It is the ongoing cost of a certain kind of consciousness. But, and this is where his philosophy earns its place, he also believed that pain faced honestly could become something else entirely. Not erased, not resolved, but transformed into insight, into art, into philosophy, into the depth that comes only to those who sat inside difficulty. So where does all of this leave you? You are intelligent, or at least you resonate with what intelligence at its most inconvenient feels like. You have probably spent a significant portion of your life feeling like you do not quite fit. You have learned to hide the full version of yourself. You may have internalized the idea that your depth is a problem, that your intensity is too much, that your need for meaning is a character flaw. Here is what Schopenhauer would tell you, and what the research would confirm, and what a long, honest look at your experience might reveal. First, stop diagnosing yourself as broken. The pain of not fitting is real, but it is a symptom of the gap between who you are and your environment. That gap is real, but the solution to a gap is not to collapse yourself to fill it. The solution is to find or build environments where it does not exist. Second, invest in depth over breadth in your relationships. You do not need many people who sort of get you. You need a few who actually do. Those people exist. They are fewer than average and harder to find, but they are out there, and when you find them, you feel something real. The relief of not having to translate yourself, the ease of being understood without explanation, that experience, even once, can change you. One solid friendship, one relationship built on real resonance, can do more than 100 surface-level connections. Depth matters. Third, make peace with solitude, not as a fallback position, but as an actual practice. Spend time alone because you choose to, not because you must. Use that time to think, to read, to create, to sit with your own mind without immediately filling the silence with noise. Schopenhauer was right that this is where the real work happens. This is where you actually become yourself, rather than the version shaped by expectation. That self, the one built in solitude rather than performed for an audience, is much sturdier, much more genuinely yours. Fourth, be selective about where you give your energy. Not every environment deserves your full self. Some simply cannot handle what you bring. That is not your failure. That is just information. And the rational response to information is not to argue with it. It is to adjust accordingly. You give them what they can use. You save the rest for the places that can actually receive it. That is not diminishment. That is wisdom. Fifth, and maybe most importantly, stop treating your own depth as a problem to be fixed. Your questions are not defects. They are your most honest features. The world has enough people comfortable going along. What it genuinely needs, even when it does not know how to receive it, is people who look more carefully. People who ask the inconvenient question. People who see the thing nobody wanted pointed out and cannot make themselves pretend they did not see it. That is you, and that matters. Even when it is uncomfortable, even when it is lonely, even when the room goes quiet after you speak. Here is something that gets lost when you are in the middle of feeling misunderstood. Most thinkers who changed the world were wildly out of step. Not slightly ahead of the curve, genuinely, drastically, sometimes dangerously out of step. They were the people their contemporaries found confusing, difficult, unsettling, too much. In many cases, actively ridiculed, dismissed, or punished for seeing what they saw. And then, eventually the world caught up, sometimes in their lifetimes, sometimes long after. Their ideas became the foundation for everything next. Schopenhauer himself is the perfect example. His masterwork was published in 1818 and almost completely ignored for decades. He spent decades in relative obscurity, convinced he was right, unable to find an audience that could receive what he was saying. And then, very late in his life, recognition started coming. By the time he died, he had begun to receive attention he always believed his work deserved. After his death, his influence exploded, reaching Nietzsche, Freud, Einstein, Thomas Mann, and the entire development of modern existential philosophy. He waited decades for the world to catch up. He did not become someone different in the meantime. He stayed who he was. He kept working. He kept thinking. He endured the obscurity and the dismissal and the quiet certainty that what he was doing mattered. That is a hard way to live. It is not romantic. It is not glamorous. It is often genuinely painful, but it is also the only way certain kinds of work get done. The world does not always recognize its most important thinkers in the moment. It catches up later, and the people who keep going anyway make that possible. You may be living in a version of that right now. What you see, what you think, what you bring, it may be ahead of what the room is ready for. That is uncomfortable, but it is not a reason to stop. There is a version of loneliness that means you are isolated and need connection. And there is another version of loneliness that means something different entirely. It means you are awake to things most people are not yet awake to. It means your mind has gone to places the standard social conversation does not visit. You are carrying a depth the culture has not figured out what to do with. That loneliness is not a signal that you need to change. It is a signal that you need to find your people. You need to build the interior life strong enough to sustain you in the gaps between those rare, real connections. That you need to stop mistaking the crowd's inability to receive you for evidence that there is nothing worth receiving. Schopenhauer's hardest and most honest gift to us: life is not going to become comfortable if you refuse to lie to yourself about it. The discomfort of seeing clearly is real, and it does not fully go away. But the alternative, choosing the comfort of the herd, has a cost too. shrinking your mind to fit the available container, trading your authentic self for the temporary warmth of belonging. That comfort is hollow. It is borrowed. It runs out. The path of the thinking person is harder. It is lonelier at certain stretches. It requires a different kind of courage. The courage to sit in the quiet, to keep asking the question, to stay awake when sleeping would be so much easier. But it goes somewhere real, not necessarily somewhere famous or celebrated, just somewhere true, somewhere that is actually yours. And in the end, Schopenhauer believed that is the only place worth going. If something in these ideas felt like someone finally said, the thing you have been thinking, know that you are not as alone as you feel. The people who think this way exist. They are harder to find, but they are out there looking for each other. Drop a real thought in the comments, not a reaction, but something you actually believe, something you have been holding on to. This space is for you. This is a space for the people who find the surface of things unsatisfying. You belong here. Let us keep going.